Paul Yearsley lives, or at least did live until very recently, down in the Southern Highlands, just south of Sydney, and is a member of the Southern Highlands ecclesia. Every little boy's dream is to be a fireman, and Paul realised that dream and joins Wilderness Conversations today to talk about what it's like being a fireman in Sydney. Paul, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
I'm curious about your early years. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Okay, it's been an interesting thing to reflecting on that. I suppose, like, one of the characteristics of my life and, through those early years, that I always had probably this balance between this academic side. Well, I love learning. I wasn't particularly a brilliant academic, sort of average, but in conjunction with that, always liked action and adventure. I love playing sport, footy, cricket. Passion is surfing. So I love being active and getting out there as well as the sort of learning aspect. So that was definitely part of who I am, I guess. A big part of my early life was my friends. Through the ecclesia, I went to Riverwood Ecclesia, and we had an awesome youth group there. Fantastic mentors that taught me the value of the Bible study. That was a very strong influence in my life and impacted me greatly. And I love people. I love those friends, and they had a big part in who I grew to become, I suppose. I had a lot of sort of heavy things happen to me, I think, when on reflection in life I think that along with the fact I probably naturally like this anyway, where I thought often deeply about life and what it was all about. A couple of examples of that. We lived in Lugano. Growing up, and I remember I'd often play cricket in the backyard with my brother, and we had these neighbours, the Norrises next door, and they had the exact same scenario, and I could hear them playing cricket in their backyard with the two brothers. And I think one day we heard the news that Michael, one of the boys, had leukemia, and he died when he was 18. So it sort of impacted me because we had this parallel thing going on, in our lives, and so there was that impact of the guys died, and the relevance of that to me. So, and in the youth group at Riverwood, we had that tragic incident with Isabel Elton being killed down the road from the hall. And that caused to me, that has a bit of an impact as well. You start reflecting on life as well. And then, all through my youth experience, there was always tragic events of people being killed or dying of things like cancer. So I would constantly be thinking about that. And then I had this experience in year 12 when I finished the HSC where one of my friends who was an Indian, his father gave him an old car as a present for finishing the HSC, and we were literally leaving the school after we'd finished our exams, and I was sitting in this full car. There was a couple of people, like the driver and person in the front seat. And there was two girls and myself in the back seat, and I was on the right hand side of the car. And for some reason, I didn't put my seatbelt on. And as he pulled out of the curb, he did this U-turn in front of a van that was coming down the road. And I remember turning my head, and in a split second, I could see the other car just about to impact my door.
Right.
And I didn't have my seatbelt on, so I launched myself over across the car, and the whole place where I was sitting was impacted, and the whole part of the car came in on that spot where I was sitting.
Wow.
And when I think about it, I thought, well, I could have quite easily died in that or been really badly injured. And so that was a moment, where you sort of think, wow, that was pretty heavy. So, yeah, I often thought quite deeply about life, and that along with the fact that I loved aspects of creation, and I never doubted there was a God because of the amazing things I could see. There was no doubt in my mind there was a God. So that led to me looking at the Bible, and the more I read the Bible, the more beauty and majesty and awesomeness about it. It sort of started to resonate with me. So all those things combined saw me, I guess, baptised when I was 18 when I was finishing the HSC or doing the HSC.
Do you remember what the catalyst was for you to decide to be baptised?
I don't think there was anything specific. I think it was just a combination of things, to be honest. And it just felt like it was the right time. I was ready. Look, you always look back on it and think, was I really ready? But it was just a moment where I thought, and I suppose a lot of my peers were getting baptised too. That has an influence, to be honest. So I think the other thing, Steve, that what I was like, I was a very, I thought fairly deeply about why I did things, and I was never really the sort of person that just did things because that's what everyone else did. And I was very much, I wanted to know why, what was the reasoning behind it. I wanted to take ownership. I've always sort of wanted to be as genuine and as authentic as possible to some extent, I guess. And so a lot of the things we just sort of took for granted what we did and how we did things. I would always be questioning and going, is there a reason behind that? So. And
your choice of vocation, your initial, you went to university, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, I started off, when I left school, I was inspired by some of my teachers. So I thought, teaching would be a great career. So I went off and started doing a teaching diploma. It was industrial arts. So there was that sort of academic-y sort of part, but a practical aspect, which seemed to be my life's theme. And, but I was fairly, like I was 19 and I got through about half of that teaching course, and I did a couple of fairly heavy prac teaching weeks of prac teaching, and it was that stressful. I thought, I've had enough of this. I need to go find something else. It was too early. I'd probably love to do it now, but at that stage of my life, it was, with everything else that was going on, it was just not the right timing, and it found it very stressful. So I dropped out of that. So I went off and I found myself through various things, I guess, moving into the property area. So I became an associate diploma in property valuation, became a property valuer, and had various jobs in that, and ended up working. One of the great jobs I had was I worked for State Superannuation Company in town. I had this great job overlooking Darling Harbour, but that was a good job because it was good pay, and one of the good things was every Wednesday I got to play football in the Domain for State Super against a lot of the other public service organisations. So, this is fantastic.
I suppose there was a mixture between sort of office work and out and about work as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and being a valuer, it wasn't all about office work. I had to, they gave me a car. I had a great car and floated around looking at various office buildings and industrial warehouses and things like that were invested by or investments by the State Super. But unfortunately, that came to an end. They had a massive restructure, and I was the junior valuer there, and I got retrenched. So I got like a sort of, I think it was $15,000 at the time, which was a reasonable amount of money, and I was in my early 20s, and what I decided to do with that, I bought half of it I spent on a car, and the other half I went to Africa.
Oh, okay.
I think it was about 1992. I went for a trip into Africa, and I was supposed to go with a a friend of mine, a brother from Sydney, but he had to pull out at the last minute. I ended up going anyway. So I went into Zimbabwe and South Africa. Again, I sort of loved the concept. I love nature. Animals fascinated me. So I went over there, went on safaris, and went to some spectacular places like Victoria Falls. I remember standing at the edge of that and just crying my eyes out, just the sheer beauty and the power, the majesty of it. And, I love that quote in Romans 1 where it says, his invisible attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, and it's always resonated with me. So, that, I suppose there was a bit of adventure and action there. There's some whitewater rafting I did down the Zambezi. But I suppose there's this combination of action and adventure and appreciation for the majesty of God through it all. And travelled to South Africa. I met a lot of South African young people, which again, it seems to be the thing that's happened to me in my life. I've bonded with these young people, and we've become lifelong friends. And some of them live in Australia today.
So did you end up going to Canada at some point?
Yeah, so I came back after Africa. I had a couple of jobs, and I found myself working for the Department of Housing, where I bought and sold property for the government. And it was during that period that there was a youth conference in Manitoulin that I wanted to get to. So I applied for leave to go over there. I remember it was pretty funny. Andrew Dangerfield, who I used to work with there, always reminds me about this. I remember writing, you had to write down your reason for applying for leave. And I wrote down as a joke, I'm going to find a wife. And Andrew Dangerfield always says, well, that came off, didn't it? So I didn't specifically really, but I went over there and had a great time in Canada. Went into, had a great time with all the young people and, talking about the Word of God and bonding around those sort of things. But also seeing some spectacular scenery, like, I went to Niagara Falls and some of the big national parks, and then also went into the US, went to Yosemite National Park, which is just absolutely spectacular. I remember crying and laughing there, looking up at these El Capitan and Half Dome and the forests there, these magnificent, massive trees. And
the big sequoia trees.
We had this, we were supposed to hire, we hired a car that was supposed to be just an ordinary car, and they didn't have that car available. So they said, would you mind if we gave you a Mustang convertible as a replacement?
No objection.
Oh, okay, then we'll take that. And that just made it so fantastic because we had an open view of everything as we drove into some of these places. So, but anyway, that introduced me to a lot of people over there, including the Abel family. So Paula, my wife, she was an Abel, daughter of Frank and Dorothy. And anyway, I came back to Australia, went back to my old job, and Paula came to Australia later that year, and that's when we started dating. And then as a result of that, she went back to Canada, and I applied for leave without pay, and I think I spent about 9 months in Canada over there, and we got married and then came back to Australia after that.
So what are some of your reflections on being married to someone from a different country? It obviously presents some real challenges from a family point of view. Yeah,
and look, Paula, it's always hard because Paula came from a very close-knit family, big family. I love their family, we got on so well, and you're always conscious of taking them away from that place that they've grown up in and all those family connections. So it's always been a pretty big priority of mine to try and earn enough money to get back there regularly. And we've been blessed enough to able to go back, particularly in the early years, like every couple of years.
And what was the discussion like? Because you would have had to decide, do we live in Canada or Australia? How did that play out, and how was the decision finally made?
Well, I always said to Paula, look, if you really want me to come over, and live in Canada, I will. But, there was part of me thinking that I think I was lying, because I only spent 3 months of their winter there, and it was that cold. It was unbelievable. I remember working on a car in a barn when it was minus 15 degrees, and I had gloves on, and I didn't have the dexterity, so I kept taking my gloves off to, put bolts on and stuff like that. And I remember having to come into the house every 5 minutes and running my hands under cold water to thaw my fingers out. So it was pretty. I think if you're geared up for it, you're used to it, and you have the right sort of equipment, the winters can be fantastic over there. Like, it's just a different mindset. But, it made sense for us to come back to Australia, because I had a small house in Wattle Grove in Sydney. I had a good job. I had a bit of security there. So, and Paula knew a few people out here, although, it did take a while for her to sort of, develop friendships, which is, I guess, natural. So we ended up coming out here, and
I really brought up your family in the Southern Highlands, just south of Sydney.
Yeah, we had, and that was the other thing, because Paula grew up in Ontario on, I think it was 100 acres. So they had a big barn there, and they cut hay, and they had cows and things like that. So I felt it was a bit sort of awkward bringing her back to suburbia in Sydney, and I always loved the open spaces as well, So we ended up. I remember it was funny the way it worked out. I had to do an excitation in down at Mittagong Ecclesia, and it was then that they took me around and had a look at the area, and I fell in love with it. And Paul and I looked at this block of land in Fitzroy Falls that we just absolutely loved, and thought, this is fantastic. So we ended up buying that, and would you believe, when the Twin Towers fell down, were destroyed on September 11, that was the day we moved from Sydney. So we'll never forget, when we relocated from Sydney down to the Southern Highlands. So we spent 20 odd years there raising our kids, and I built 2 houses in that time, and commuted to Sydney with a fire service, because by then I was in the fire, working for Fire Rescue New South Wales, so back in Campbelltown. But we had a fantastic experience down there, a rural country. It's sort of rural. We lived in this beautiful little rural village, and had some great schools really close to us, great country schools, and we had a great experience there. And the ecclesia, we love the ecclesia. And we've only just relocated to the Central Coast, so that was the end of an era, and we were very sad to leave. We love all the brothers and sisters there, but it became a little bit unsustainable for us with our family and the kids' connections, and we felt like it was the right time to move. But yeah, we had a great time down there.
So you had lots of family experiences, good and bad. And one of the experiences of the Yearsley family was losing Priscilla, your sister.
Yeah.
I think just before she was 50. Tragedy for the Yearsley family. What's your reflection on that? Looking back on it, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well, that's a massive thing, because that's you watch other people suffer, and but this, when it affects your own family, it's close to home. And Priscilla and I there was only 1 year separating us. So, and we, I love Priscilla. We were very similar in the way we thought and the way we loved our friends, and, love God, and wanted to be as authentic and genuine as possible, and wanted to have some meaning from it all. And, so yeah, it was pretty hard. I didn't, because of where we live, we didn't see them a lot, but we always had this, lovely connection. So it was hard, and
did it have a big impact on your daughters, because they would have coming to maturity, and they would have watched this from afar?
I mean, it's hard not to. I mean, it directly impacts them as well. So
yeah,
I think my kids are fairly conditioned, because with a lot of the heavy stuff that I would see in the fire service, I would come home and process, not in great detail because I wanted to protect them a little bit from that, but I would always talk generally about some of the bad things that happened. So we would probably always talk about, some of those heavy situations of life, and yeah, it's very sad for them because there's that direct connection, and it makes you understand. It gives you an understanding of what other people go through, and you have a lot more empathy.
Well, I do want to talk about the fact that you became a fireman. Now, every little boy's dream is to become a fireman.
Yes.
You've never really grown up. You're still a little boy, I think, probably by your own admission.
Yeah.
How on earth do you become a fireman from a valuer, and why?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I guess from a young age, like you said, every boy wants to be a fireman. And I remember where we lived at Lugano, we lived quite close to the main road. And I have this distinct memory of when I was in primary school around that sort of age, and even right through, I'd hear sirens coming into Lugano, and I'd always race out to the front veranda and I'd try and guess whether it was a police car, an ambulance, or a fire truck. And because the fire trucks are a bit more slow moving, I could kind of work out, what was coming. So I have that distinct memory. But so I suppose it's sort of, and with the sort of person I am, it was kind of a natural fit. So when we came back to Australia from Canada, I was working in the Department of Housing. I was promoted to an area where I was still doing this similar job, and instead of doing a lot of the hands-on out in the field, negotiating with people and looking at property and coming back to the office, I was in meetings and managing people, and I didn't enjoy that as much, and so that provoked me to start thinking about what I wanted to do. And then I'd always thought about the fire service, and then an opportunity came up where they were advertising. And so I just applied, and I knew it was super competitive. So I didn't have great expectations, but I was pretty hopeful. I remember when I applied, there was 9,500 applicants for, I think there was a list of 500 they created. So
what was the sort of criteria they would be looking for?
Well, there's different stages. So you had to fill out sort of like some life experiences, how you dealt with sort of trauma, how you managed chaos, the sort of person you were. So you had to sort of, in this application form, fill that out. And from that, they selected 1,500 people. So once you got through that process, I don't know how you can imagine going through 9,500 applicants to select, chop 8,000 people. I don't know how they did that, but anyway. So we got through that stage, and then there was 1,500 of us we had to do this testing, so these cognitive tests. So we had to go to this big hall, and you had to. They gave you like pieces of paper to fill out, like put all your answers down. And so the things like you had diagrams about, there was practical things like if this pulley goes this way, and there's something connected to it, what's that other pulley doing over there? So there's this spatial sort of stuff going on, reasoning, mechanical reasoning. I remember there was questions around spelling. So you had 90 sort of words, and you had to say within a certain time frame, true or false, whether I was spelled correctly.
So firemen need to spell correctly.
I don't know about that because I'm probably one of the world's worst spellers, so I don't know how I got through all that part of it. But, so there was those sort of things. There was mathematical questions, but a lot of it was time-based, so there was a bit of pressure on you. And I think what they were looking for in that was your ability to function under pressure, which is hard to do sometimes. But, so from that, they chose the 500 out of that 1,500, and I can't remember what I was. I think it was 300 or something on that. And then from there, you had to wait until your turn came to go into the training college. So
was there a physical test before that?
No. So once you got through that application and that testing, that mental testing, aptitude stuff, that's when yeah, the next stage was the physical. So you had a whole day where there was things like you had to do the beat test. So you had to get to level 9.6 on the beat test. So run backwards and forwards between these markers 20 metres apart, getting faster and faster. So you had to be reasonably fit, because it was not only that, you then had all these strength tests like dragging dummies and hose and hauling things up towers. And, so there was a fairly intense physical process and testing that went on. So if you were reasonably fit, I was always pretty active, just playing sport, and I was always fairly health conscious. So I tried to maintain a level of fitness. And after that, there was an interview. So they ask you some questions about how you would cope and deal with certain situations. So, I remember one of the questions of mine was, I think they referred to I think it was the Kempsey bus crash. Remember, where there's quite a lot of fatalities that crash. And they said, okay, so you've got bodies spread out all over the road and in the bus. What are you going to do? So what they were looking for is, who do you prioritise? How do you go about methodically working without, getting all flustered so there was those sort of things. So there was an interview at the end, and then following the interview, you went to the medical section, and they did all this testing on your body and eyesight and ears and hearing and stuff like that. So yeah, so it was a bit of a process. I think from the time that I applied, it was about to the time I got actually in the training college was about 18 months, nearly 2 years maybe. So you had to be patient.
And then it was the training college a full-time job, or did you keep your older job and just do it part-time?
No, it's full-time. It was pretty intense training for 3 months back then. So,
and then into a fire department.
And then you graduated, and then straight out to the fire station.
And I imagine you come in as the rookie, the junior, and that's a whole experience, I imagine, in that environment.
Yeah. Well, it's like anything, Steve. Like you can learn as much as you want on paper, but until you get into the real world, that's when you start learning. Even little things. I remember, we trained just this little thing. I remember as a rookie, I went to a car fire, and I was hosing this car, and I went past the fuel tank, and the cap was off the fuel tank. So I punched water into the fuel tank, and it blew a fireball back into my, next to my face. And that's the sort of thing that you just park in your memory, and it's an experience that you go, well, I'll never let that happen again, because I know what I did wrong. And when you're under pressure and things are, it's real life stuff that you've got to sort of cope with and deal with. So
obviously we have a sense of what firemen do, but I don't really have a sense for what a typical day would be, because you're not putting out car fires all day, every day. So what would be a typical day for you?
That's an interesting question, because there probably isn't a typical day really, because any day can be interrupted by whatever calls you get. And that's what I love about this job, is that you never know what's going to happen. It could be the most horrendous day of your life. It could be a real quiet day, and somewhere in between. But, if nothing happens, generally a typical day as I arrive. So we do a 24-hour shift, have a day off, and then another 24-hour shift, and then have 5 days off. So our 24-hour shift would start, I generally get in there around 7 o'clock. We have a bit of a chat with the off-going crew. If there's any things that have happened, have a bit of a talk, connect. And then for the shift that I'm on now, we do some physical activity. So we have an exercise routine. So we do some weights and running and whatever we're doing. So we're doing that together generally. So that's kind of nice. And then we have come back from that and have some breakfast and get changed, and then our duties start. So we're cleaning the station. If you're driving one of the fire trucks, I've got two fire trucks at our station at the moment. So if you're driving, you're responsible for checking that truck's okay, the equipment's there, it's all good. So you go through that process, and from there, assuming again that there's no calls. So then once all that's done, sort of we might go and grab a coffee and sort out some stuff for lunch. After lunch is generally either free time, or we might do some drills, or we might be going to a school talking to the kids about fire safety, fire ed, whatever it is. So it's all different. But a lot of the time there's a bit of downtime in the afternoon because they're very conscious about fatigue management these days. So, and
then as you get into the evening, do you actually have a sleeping quarters there?
Yeah. So by the time the evening comes around, our shift, we cook a meal together. So we all take turns cooking and we share that together. And then after dinner, it's sort of downtime. We might do a bit of a drill or something. Depends what's going on. And then we're off to bed generally around, I don't know, it varies, but say 10 o'clock. And we sleep in these quarters. And then if we get a call, a light comes on and there's a soft alarm that gets louder and louder. And, we get up. And there's something that comes over the PA that tells us what call it is. So depending on how serious that is, it determines the level of your adrenaline.
Yeah.
It starts kicking in. If it's an automatic fire alarm, a building alarm, is usually 90% of that time it's a false alarm. So I sort of function at about 50%. But if you hear a call come over where it's house fire, person's reported, which means there's persons trapped in that house, then your adrenaline's through the roof, and that's a lot more serious. So you switch on as fast as you can, and you get going.
It would be an interesting working relationship with your peers. You would end up being a lot closer than what a typical office person would be, or someone who's doing can I call it a normal job? What are your reflections on sort of your life in the fire station from a environmental point of view?
Yeah, look, there's obviously with any job there's positives and negatives. And some of the positives are that we work as a team, so there's a lot of camaraderie, and I love that part. I love that concept of working as a team. And when we've been through and we go through a lot of heavy stuff together, so there is in our faith, we call each other brother and sister, and that's so special to me, that term, because of our shared values and shared love of God and the gospel and his word and so on. But there is times when we call each other brother and sister in my job, because there's some pretty heavy things that we have to see together and work towards together. And there's a lot of satisfaction when you work hard and you make a contribution to someone else's life. There's a lot of banter that goes on, lighthearted banter, and I love that. I love a joke, and because we have a lot of time together, we're often discussing a lot of things about life and each other's lives, and we laugh and cry together, and it's like a family, in a lot of respects. Plus, you got to remember we get to play with a lot of cool stuff. The truck that I'm driving, from time to time is worth $2 million. It's fantastic, state of the art. It's one of the newest trucks. State of the art aerial. They call it an aerial pumper. It's like a big cherry picker with a pump on it, and it's fantastic. And we've got a lot of really good equipment that we can use to help, and so we use that together, and there is that strong bond and relationship. And sometimes there's been some situations where we could have been killed together as well. So there is a very strong bond that you don't get. I never experienced in an office, for example, in an office environment.
Would you recommend this vocation for young men?
Yeah, look, I get asked that a fair bit, and the thing I usually say is that because of what we are exposed to and the emotional impact that can have on you, psychological impact, I think it's really important that before you enter any emergency service, I think, if you're thinking about it, or, those sort of medical professions where you're exposed to death and trauma and stuff like that, you need to have a little bit more life experience so you develop that mental strength. You do develop it over the course of your career anyway. I remember you do become quite hardened. So in some ways you've got to be careful of that because, when you get home from work and one of your kids has scratched their arm and you go, oh, it's just a scratch, and you've been dealing with someone with their arms been hanging off. It's hard to sit there sometimes for that. But so you need to have, I think, a little bit more life experience to be able to mentally deal with it.
So in some ways you think it was probably a good thing that you did some other things before you went into the fire service?
For sure. And there's an advantage of that too, because we get, a significant amount of time off. It allows you to go and work another job. So if you've become a tradie or something like that, that's perfect because you can do a couple of days extra work, earn a bit of extra money and utilise it that way. But there's also there's an aspect of working in this environment which is awkward and hard as a Christian too. So I often say, as good as it is, and you will have those good times, you are the odd person out in some respects because of your values and your different way of life. So it is a little bit awkward, a little bit uncomfortable from time to time. And you will be grilled on your beliefs, your views, and you need to have processed why you believe what you do, because you will have time that you will be exposed on this. And I've had some great conversations over the years, and it's sometimes I've had to readjust the way I answer questions. Just so you go through those experiences, but it's hard because you're put under pressure because you are the odd person out, as much as you are still part of that team. So if that makes sense. So I think you need to be pretty strong in your faith and have pretty set mindset about what you believe. Because I could see in that environment you could be easily swayed to follow down a path which would compromise, the values that we aspire to as a true Christian believer.
Mm. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. When you think about your time as a fireman over a couple of decades now, what are some of the events that pop into your mind when you think about sort of the extremities of what you've experienced?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've had so many scary moments, I suppose, and so many sad moments. So scary moments, I guess. There's been a few occasions where I can remember. In fact, we had one 2 weeks ago. We had a house, and I had this happen before. We had a house fire that you go in and, we turned up and there was smoke billowing from the roof. And normally what would happen is in a house fire is the smoke would bottle up. You'd have very poor visibility. So you'd be searching, if you needed to, searching for people by feel, touch. We have a thermal imaging camera that we use as well because you just can't see. But in this occasion, the smoke was venting through the roof, and my partner and I went into that house, and there was fire in the kitchen area and a number of other areas, but majority of the fire, we looked up and it was all through the roof. You could see a roaring fire through all the downlight areas and vents and stuff. So the majority of the fire was up there. And then the immediate thought there is that the roof is compromised, so we're going to be careful here that it doesn't collapse on us. So we started to back out. The whole thing collapsed. So, you have those moments where those split seconds where something can happen, and it has happened to people that you reflect on. I've had, I've fallen through, on a ground floor, just fallen because the floor was burnt away, and I've fallen down on floor joists, even though I'm trying to feel with my feet. I was in a house, 2-story house fire once, where my partner fell through the floor down to his shoulders.
So you work together in pairs all the time for these reasons?
Yes, yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. Like this is a very strong health and safety sort of aspect that we always work together. You know, the Bible talks about that. You know, two are better than one. That's definitely true in this situation. So,
And you must see some horrendous things as well, and probably don't need to go into the gory details, but what sort of things do you see, and how do you deal with that?
yeah, look, we do. There's been some pretty horrific things that we see, and obviously one of the heaviest things we go to are car accidents. And I remember my first fatality was at Kashula, where there was a 21-year-old that committed suicide by driving, and he was clocked at 150 kilometres an hour, and he drove straight into a B-double truck. And, we turned up there, and, this kid was just, there wasn't a lot of blood. He was just, his internal sort of stuff just smashed to pieces like rubber. And, we're having to cut him out and put him in a body bag. But that's fairly traumatic. It's always fairly tense. No one likes seeing that sort of stuff. And, for the first 3 years of my career, I think I counted about 20 fatalities from car accidents. So it became quite heavy in that period. But that particular one, I think the worst thing was that he was Greek, and his mother turned up at the scene, and she was hysterical. And I'll never forget the screaming and the wailing from that. So, yeah, you sort of deal with that kind of thing. I remember you have some sad moments. I think it was a couple of months ago. I was driving the truck, and we pulled up at an accident scene where a lady had been T-boned by another driver, and the cars had separated, and she was injured. And a husband who had turned up after the event was hugging her through the window. And I'll never forget that image, because I pulled up, and that was the first thing I saw was this husband, what turned out to be a husband, hugging her as if that was I don't know what happened to her. I think she survived, but he didn't know that. So, yeah, there's some pretty horrific things, and I think it's really important with anything like that to properly vent it, to talk about it. And I've always been okay with that. I have always come home or talk at the fire station with the others, and it definitely helps process it. I have my moments where I cry and let it out that way as well. And
you get support, like you get professional counselling support as required?
Yeah, the fire brigade has a chaplain, and one of my nicknames at one stage was Junior Chaplain. But yeah, you get that support. You have critical incident debrief teams that come at that. Every fatality that you're exposed to now, that they come out and talk to you about it. So we have pretty good support. But to me, my own peers and family have been the greatest source of support, where I can come home and just chat to, say, Paula, or cry, come home and just walk. Like recently I came home, that house fire where that the roof collapsed. One of the hardest things I find sometimes is when you walk into a fire like that, and it's relatively untouched. You can see what the house is like before it's completely destroyed. That's really hard, because you see the impact on people's lives. It was once normal, and then it's just completely destroyed, and then you see all the distress and the pain and the groaning on people's lives. Romans 8 talks about that. The groaning of life. And I often reflect on that when I see some of these horrific things, and that impacts me, because I see the pain on people's, in people's eyes and in their voice. And yeah, so the other day I'd come home and I'd try to talk and I'd just cry. But that's good. It vents it out, and talking about it, not in the specific details, because I don't think sometimes that's healthy to others, but generally speaking it out is very useful, very important. One of the most amazing days I remember is in the 2019, 2020, we had the severe bushfires, the Black Summer bushfires. Well, during that period, I think I went on about five tours to different places down the south coast, out west, up the Blue Mountains, and only on one of those tours I was active because it's pretty heavily active. The others were just sit around and watch. Nothing really happened, or we came after the event, which just mopping up. But I remember this particular day, we were out at, I think it was Oakdale, and it was like being in a war zone. The fire was intense. It was pretty scary. There were animals I watched running out of the forest, like deer and kangaroos, and it was terrible watching them trying to escape this fire. There were places burning left, right, and centre. I saw the anxiety and the stress levels of all the owners and people that were impacted by it. So we were working so hard trying to do what we could, and it was like we were so overwhelmed, and it was like this impossible task. And it was really what I imagined war to be like, where we were firing a cannon off the front of our truck, trying to hose down stuff, and then running from one property to another, and helicopters were bombing, very close to us. It was intense. It was hot. And there were so many people working together, and the team effort that went there was quite amazing. And then the community spirit, that I was so grateful and thankful. I had people coming up and thanking us and hugging us, and so appreciative. It was just a spectacular day. And, I remember getting home the next morning, just being so exhausted, and walked in through the door and burst into tears. It was just such a momentous day. And it was, I really saw the groaning of life, as we talked about Romans 8, whole creation groans, waiting for the redemption of our bodies, and people were exposed to this horrific event. And it just really impacts you when you see that sort of stuff. And it's another one of those things which make you look forward to the time when Jesus comes, and our Lord Jesus comes, and he reigns as King, and he takes away all this suffering and removes it from people's lives.
We've certainly seen a lot of people in the extremities of life. What's your reflection on that, and how has that affected you, do you think, around the way you view life?
Oh, Steve, to be honest, it's been, I know this sounds funny, but it's one of the most amazing blessings that I've been privileged to experience. Because I was always someone who thought deeply about life, and I mentioned before some of those experiences in my early life. And when you see life taken away and people die in your arms, and these horrific things happen, it's always made me realise how quickly life goes, how fragile we are. Death does not discriminate between rich, poor, smart, less academic, whatever it is. Death does not discriminate, and life can go so quickly. And it's made me 100% value the gospel, the hope of life that I've been blessed with. And I'm so grateful every day for something beyond this suffering and the groaning of this life that I'm exposed to. I had last week or the week before, went to a car accident. I had some guy that was badly injured, and he had some spinal and abdominal injuries, and I didn't know whether he was going to die or not. But we were there before the ambulance, and this guy was saying to me, "Let me stand up so I can die on my feet." And that, you think, if only this person could hear the gospel and accept it and understand the blessing of life that we've been granted. I say every day to myself, and I often say to my kids, you are the most special, blessed people on the planet, because you've been exposed to this amazing blessing of life eternal that comes through an understanding of God and the gospel and his word. And it's something I never want to take for granted. I never will, because I am constantly reminded of it in this job. And it's something you don't get to see in a normal, officey type environment. So yeah, it's been an amazing blessing, and yeah, I suppose the other thing too is that in these sobering moments, you do get to have those conversations with your work colleagues, your team, and I've had some great chats with the guys over the years, because this is intense stuff. This is drills down to the, what's life all about? Look how quick life goes. Have I got my life in order? What do I want from life? So from time to time you have those discussions around that, and that leads to the privilege of being able to share that to, our belief and my belief and trust in the gospel with others.
Paul, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.